So the First Descendant Season 2 brings us an all-new dungeon called Void Vessel. It's pretty cool, and it's a very important dungeon because it's how you unlock the new Descendant Keelan, as well as the fellow Canine. And today I'm going to give you a guide that gives you only the details you need to know to run this infiltration efficiently so that you get all of the parts and materials you need to craft these Descendants. Let's get into it.
Wait, did we just become best friends? So nice to meet you. I think you're cool.
3 really important elements. 1, how to complete the Void Vessel. 2, how to unlock Keelan, and the 3rd, how to unlock the fellow. I'll put in 3 chapters, so if you need to rewatch this, you can skip around. First things first, you need to unlock the Void Vessel. And you're after this exploration operation quest for the Void Vessel. You basically just have to have a few conversations that starts with Nell. So do that until you get to that quest. You can choose whatever Descendant you like to go in there for this quest, but once you're in, it's gonna throw you into a cutscene of Keelan. After the cinematics, it's gonna throw you back to your character. Now this acts as your tutorial, and it's pretty good at giving you the fundamentals of the Void Vessel. So go through that tutorial, defeat the boss, which will be pretty easy, get your rewards, and then return back to Albion. You're gonna need to do a few more conversations, like talk to Keelan and Inez, and then talk to Nell, and then talk to Keelan and Inez again. So after you have all those conversations, the Void Vessel terminal, which is located right front and center in Albion, should be unlocked. So you can play on normal and hard. Okay, let's get into that need to know stuff for the Void Vessel. There are 2 main objectives of the Void Vessel, but the primary one is to defeat the boss at the end so you have access to the data vaults, which give you the parts you need for the Descendant and the fellow. Now, what's confusing for a lot of people up front is that there's a time element here, but the infiltration in its entirety is not based on time. Only the Void Boss is. So your job is to increase the time with the boss. And to get access to all possible rewards in a category, your goal is to have over 2 minutes and 0 seconds remaining after defeating the boss. And to ensure that, what you need to do is interact with as many Vulgus comms beacons out of a possible 10. And what this does is going to give you additional time to fight the boss. So once the boss appears, the clock starts ticking, which is really smart. So if there's somebody lagging behind and they're teleporting in, there's a little buffer for them to show up. We'll get into the mechanics on the boss in a little bit, but the idea here is to defeat him as fast as possible so you have over 2 minutes remaining after he's dead. And then from there, you choose the reward based on what you need. So if you had over 2 minutes, you're gonna have access to the intact data vault and everything below. If you had at least 1 minute and 20 seconds, you'll have access to the imperfect data vault and everything below. And if you had at least 40 seconds, you're gonna have restricted data vault and everything below. And the base reward just for getting there, so sort of a last place trophy, is the lost data vault, but it's still important. The real point of these is to allow you to target the parts that you're looking for and receive a greater chance at receiving that one part. And I'm actually gonna go through this a little deeper later on in the video, and I suggest you don't miss that part because there's a lot of details that I think might help you in your experience here that I'd like to share with you. But for now, let's continue. As far as discovering the data comms devices that you have to interact with to add time, there's no super crazy trick on that. You sort of just learn where they are and keep an eye on the proximity indicators or the symbol on your HUD that lets you know that there's one nearby. They look like this. A lot of people have figured out where the usual places are. These comms can be on top of rooms or in some very odd places, like in dark corners and crevices. So if you see somebody going to an unusual location, they're aware of that, and it might be good for you to tag along so you also learn those locations. The second objective is to interact with as many of these storage boxes along the way to the boss fight as possible. Remember, the main chunk of the Void Vessel is not timed. So it's okay to stop to open up these crates. It's only the boss fight time that matters. So the maps are somewhat random, and that's gonna make it kind of confusing when you're navigating this. After so many runs, you're gonna get accustomed to the layouts, and it becomes much, much easier. That being said, your Asive is going to be your best friend. They added a really nice navigation system in here, so use that regularly. So there are these main channels that the game is gonna keep you on to guide you to the boss room. But there are pivot points where the map will vary from run to run. So basically in the first fight room, you're either gonna go left or you're gonna go right. And there's nothing special you need to know here because it's not a choice. So there's 4 main rooms that will always be there. So there's that first room where you either go left or right. There's this second room or major fight where you have this big, maybe that's an iron heart looking thing. Can't remember what they called that thing. Then you have this room where you have to interact with a few things. And then finally the boss room. Okay, now here comes the hard part, the loot caves. So like I said, one of the main objectives is to interact with the storage boxes. There are multiple types of storage boxes, but the ones I want you to stay focused on are the broken storage boxes, which don't require a key. Those are going to supply you with just about everything you need to unlock Keelan. The other box I want you to worry about are the experimental storage boxes. These require decryption keys. You can only get decryption keys by completing a Void Vessel run. And hard mode will give you 6 per run. The experimental storage boxes are what deliver the materials you need to craft your fellow. And he needs a lot of them. But it basically turns out, and I think they did this on purpose, by the time RNG delivers you all of the parts you need on your fellow, you're gonna have all of the materials you need to craft your fellow as long as you were interacting with these storage boxes along the way. So as far as the storage box rooms or the loot caves, they're spread all around the map and they're sort of in pain in the ass locations. That's sort of the point. So to access many of them, you end up having to go through some sort of like ventilation system or whatever and drop down in on the room. And some of them are along the way and you just need to break the basically barrier. Any damage skill will do that. So like the comms devices, there's no real trick to figuring out where they all are except your Sieve gives you a general idea. So constantly be pinging that. You'll see the white and green indicators on your HUD and just head in that general direction, usually through one of the tunneling systems. And if there's a big room, it'll sort of just stand out at you. You need to know about traps. They're everywhere. Laser beams, drones. But let's talk about the laser beams. I haven't run very many Descendants here. I basically used Sharon throughout the whole thing. But when she's cloaked, she can run straight through the laser beams. And I think some Descendants have abilities that will allow them to pass through it as well. I think Keelan's Void Dash, whatever you call that, will probably get him through those. But if you know any other Descendants that can slide through those things pretty easily, let us know in the comments below. Sharon can pass right through them, but there are these generators that power those up most of the time, and you need a skill to break its shield in order to destroy it. So when you see those generators, take them out. Otherwise, if you're using somebody like, I don't know, Bunny or Glay, then you're gonna have to get through these the old-fashioned way, which I could imagine is annoying. But for efficiency, I recommend looking towards Descendants that can bypass these defenses. The other defense that you need to be aware of are the surveillance drones. They're usually only in major combat rooms, but do yourself a favor and shoot them on sight. Having a sniper like the Afterglow as a backup weapon is really helpful here. But what you don't want to do is be detected by them because they will sound an alarm and call in some more troops. If you accidentally set off the alarm, it's not really that big of a deal. You can just muscle through it. Okay, once you get to this room, there are a few steps. So you have to take out 2 waves, including their mini bosses, which are going to drop a detonating device to take out the generators. Once you do that, you have to interact with the terminal above and then deal with one more final major wave, and then you're on your way. All right, now let's talk about combat. Besides navigating in open boxes, this is what you're spending the rest of your time on. There are tons of enemies you're going to be interacting with, but it's not super hard. You can get overwhelmed by enemies. It feels like it's on par or maybe even a little bit easier than 400% infiltrations. Most rooms contain multiple waves of adds and several mini bosses, but what this dungeon definitely has a lot of is champions. Hundreds of champions. So champions are usually orange titled enemies, and they're going to be the ones that have that special shield. They call it the arcade barrier, and certain skills can penetrate it to damage the enemy underneath it and possibly kill them. But ultimately what you want to do is take out the champion. He's the one that's providing the barrier. And you need to do this with firearm damage. So Descendants that balance both skill and firearm damage are really good here. And I used Sharon 100% of the way, and she's absolutely efficient. I think just about anybody works here. I'll do a feedback video later, but I gotta say they did a really good job on this as far as not making any one descendant seem too overpowered. And that's what was nice. It felt like everybody was doing their part. But definitely offensive orientated mobbing builds are best. You don't really need a medic in here, so Eugen's healing side isn't that useful. Ajax Void barriers aren't really that useful, but if you're using those descendants offensively with mobbing setups, that's fine. I think they're great. Although speed is helpful, it is not the deciding factor on which is the best descendant here. One of the things that put a leash on Freyna in this dungeon are those arcade barriers. Because they require weapon damage and there's so many of them, Freyna can't just obliterate a room. That opens up even gameplay from other skill and weapon dealers too. And finally, for descendants, I don't recommend coming here super glassy. If you go down in the first or second room, it's probably a sign that your descendant doesn't have the survivability for this. And I've had parties where I was picking somebody up the entire way, and it's very annoying because that means that boss fight is going to be rough and it's timed. I did so many runs I can't even count, but the amount of times I failed, I can count. Maybe it was 2 or 3, and I can tell you why in each one of those cases. People kept going down and we kept having to pick them up over and over and over again, and it ate the clock. People came in with descendants that weren't damage dealers. And a bad combination can happen, like a Eugen healer and an Ajax tank survivability build, and then a Freyna who's putting out poison that can't go through the void barriers, and the build didn't have weapon damage, so it just takes too much time to defeat the boss, and then you end up with a fail. So my final tips for descendants are you want to have really good weapon damage coming with skill damage or AoE applications, and you want to make sure you have enough survivability on your build. All right, let's talk about the main event, the boss fight. So the Dread Armor Commando, who's pretty cool by the way, he basically has 3 phases and a bunch of attacks, but I don't want to overcomplicate this fight with a bunch of details because it's not really necessary. So I'm just going to give you what you need to know against him. Besides killing you, what he's going to try to do is activate these generators. So you'll see him interacting with them from time to time, and when he does, he'll put a shield around it. The only way to get through that shield is with skill damage. So his shields are a little bit different than the other arcade barriers. When you see anything on him or related to him with a shield, only skill damage will penetrate that shield. So weapons down, skills up. And when he interacts with that generator, it puts out these giant laser beams. Now, whatever descendant you're using, take out that generator with a skill. And do that as fast as possible because that AoE effect hurts. All his other mechanics are pretty intuitive. The only one you really have to be aware of, the one that generally puts people down a lot, is his sort of rampage fire tornado thing, whatever you want to call that, but it's limited in range. His shield is going to be invulnerable or immune to just whatever damage. Can't put a little bit of damage on it by hitting it square in the center or its weak point. He'll put out this big laser barrier as well, sort of similar to what Kyle has. If you shoot it dead center on its weak point, it will also put damage on it. He's going to spawn in adds regularly, and that's your source of heals and mana and ammo. Otherwise, stay focused on the boss. Time is of the essence. And your goal ultimately is to have 2 minutes on the clock when he goes down. Once he does, he's going to drop some loot. This big vault appears, and inside you will be able to select reward based on how many minutes you have left on the clock. Okay, now let's talk about what you need to know in regards to selecting data vaults. So if we look at the intact data, for example, for the fellow, you'll notice that his sheepdog code is at 25%. His enhanced cell is at 20, his stabilizer at 15, and his catalyst is at 10. So 25 for the code. Mark that. Okay, if we go down here to the imperfect, the sheepdog code is only 8%. If you go down here, the sheepdog code is 9. And if you go here, the sheepdog code is 8%. So if you're hunting for the sheepdog code, you're gonna want to open the intact data vault every time. And similarly, if you already have the sheepdog code and you now need, let's say, the spiral catalyst, then you want to look at the imperfect data vault, which gives you a 25% chance at the spiral catalyst and only a 8% chance at the sheepdog code. Good news is, if you don't get what you're looking for, there's a great chance you're going to get something else quite useful, like the resource box or gold. I got those a lot, especially the gold. But as RNG does what RNG does, do expect to get multiple blueprints on parts. The system works exactly the same for Keelan. So if you need Keelan's code, for example, the intact data vault is going to give you a 15% chance on that. And if you go to the imperfect data vault, it's only a 4% chance. The restricted is also 4%. And then the lost data vault is a 3% chance. So if you're looking for the Keelan code, you want to be opening the intact data vault every single time. There's no guarantee on it, but that's how you do it. Based on the percentages, Keelan should be more difficult to acquire the parts that you need than the fellow. The fellow gets up to 25% on his parts, where Keelan's best is only 15%. So when farming for Keelan, expect a lot of gold. You can use the pity system in the Void Vessel, and I used it for Keelan's code, and I forgot about it. I probably should have turned it on a lot earlier. Could have saved me a ton of time. Do know that the pity system will only work for the category of vault that you're looking for. For example, if you decide you need the Keelan code and you want the pity system to apply to that, then anytime you run the Void Vessel and don't get the Keelan code, it will give you a percentage of a meter. Once you get to 100% of that meter, let's just say 10 runs, it will be a guarantee that you get the Keelan code. Now here's the catch. RNG is going to present you with either Keelan data vaults or fellow data vaults at the end of the fight. So if you have the Keelan code in your pity system, but you get fellow data vaults at the end of the fight, that run will not count towards the pity system's percentages. The run will only count towards the pity system if you're presented with Keelan data vaults. It was really hard to tell what percentage RNG has on Keelan versus the fellow, but I gotta say it felt really balanced. Maybe it's a 50-50 chance. As far as getting all the materials for Keelan, I wouldn't even stress out about it or track much. Just open every single broken storage container you come across. When it comes to the Hound, just open every single experimental storage box you come across. If you stay focused on those two things, you should be in a good place by the time you have all of your parts. As far as time, I estimate it takes about 4 to 6 hours per target that you're crafting. So if it's just Keelan, anywhere between 4 and 6 hours of Void Vessel runs, or if it's just your fellow, about the same. And if you're farming both of them at the same time, it'll take somewhere between 8 and 12 hours. These are just estimates based on my experiences. RNG might treat you just a little bit different. At this stage, you have to make a decision. And so let me give you the details on this. The Void Vessel is the only way to unlock Keelan and the fellow, right? You can be presented with Keelan data vaults or fellow data vaults. And RNG seems to be the dictator of that. However, there have been reports of people saying that they're only getting Keelan data vaults. And I have a hypothesis on this, but this is not known fact because I have no way of testing it. But there's another step. Anais has a quest or a side quest. You have to interact with her, and she kind of goes into the background on the fellow and how he's related to this game or Descendants. And by completing that conversation, it opens up another side quest, which is called Fellow Research, and that will reward you an emote once you craft your fellow. I have a suspicion that those people that are only seeing Keelan data vaults at the end of Void Vessels haven't had this conversation, which might be the precursor to unlocking the fellow data vaults. So it's possible to skip that conversation and continue to do your Void Vessel and only farm Keelan. It's possible that it is more efficient doing it that way. However, from my experience, not knowing that and having that conversation with Anais, RNG presented either Keelan data vaults or fellow data vaults. So basically I was farming both of them at the same time. And after all said and done, it seems like it would sort of just pan out to being the same amount of time. But since you need a bunch of materials for the Descendant and the Fellow, the amount of runs, whether you talk to Anais or not, whether you separate your Keelan farm from your Fellow farm, is probably going to be the same. However, for any of those people that purchase their Fellow right out of the gate, this might be a useful tip. Speaking of tips, so I don't know if that is actually the case. It is very possible that those people who reported only getting Keelan data vaults at the very end was just seeing RNG being RNG, and people on the internet tend to exaggerate a little bit. If that's not the case, I don't recommend purchasing the Fellow. And that's because if RNG really is presenting the data vaults at random, like I experienced, then you're going to be getting Fellow parts whether you need them or not, which of course you can sell at the ETA 0 vendor, but still. It's a matter of time and you're still putting in the work. So anybody who's made their way through this, let me know if you've only seen Keelan vaults and if you had talked to Anais about the genetic engineering of the fellow. Thank you for hanging out with me. My name is Tuxedo Bandido. That's Tito Bandido.
One and only.
And this was another episode of The First Descendant. If you found this video helpful, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications to ensure you don't miss out on the fantastic experiences waiting for you in The First Descendant. And if you like videos like this, check out the one I have recommended for you right here. If you have anything you want to see covered, be sure to let me know in the comments below. And thank you to all the channel members and donors who make everything possible. Tux Nation wouldn't be without you.
When you buy or download anything for The First Descendant, be sure to use Tux's creator code to support the channel. Easy peasy.
Follow me.